Hello everyone, welcome to 27. I'm here today because I want to tell you that there is more to being passionate about cars than just automatically defaulting to a Porsche. A few weeks ago I did a little video on my friend's 997 Turbo S. The premise was that as good as that car was, you could do better. One of the alternatives that I mentioned was an Aston Martin DBS. Now imagine that you've done well for yourself. You're no Bill Gates, you're certainly not the Donald, but you have 80k burning a hole in your pocket and you want to get something that feels truly special. You're a classy guy and you don't need to have the car to be used as a daily. You can use it for special occasions and for weekends and so on. You want something rewarding to drive, but you also want something that feels special and you don't have to rely on it as a daily. I'm going to tell you why this is the car that you should buy. Later on we'll have a look at a few alternatives on piston heads like we did last time, and I'm also going to drop a little bit of a bombshell about this car. But before that, we'll just take it for a quick spin now and I'll tell you a little bit about how it actually feels to drive. Let's get one thing out of the way immediately. This is not as good to drive hard as a 997 Turbo. It just, it just isn't. It hasn't got the body control or the precision, but it does have soul. This car was still under the influence of the Ford era when Ford owned Astons, and it may well be that, as some people say, this V12 is just two Mondeo V6s glued together. But even if that's the case, oh my god, I don't give a shit. It completely craps all over that turbo Metzger of the 997. It really does. Now, if it was the normal Metzger and some of the RS cars, then it would be a different story. But with the turbo on it, it just muffles it. And it's just, oh my god, this is just so nice. It sounds so good. This car's been decatted as well, so the engine note is even more there. With this engine, it really just makes this car feel alive. Now, it doesn't have the brutal pull of the 997. I mean, speed-wise, I think they're pretty much very similar, but it just doesn't have the same sort of push or the same feeling that the 997 does. I think that's just the nature of that turbo engine. It is really fast, and I think the speed is just delivered in a more linear way. The gear stick is the result of a one-night stand between Swarovski and Transformers. It is absolutely hideous, to me anyway. The current owner really likes it. The gearbox action though, the manual, it's fine. I mean, it's not the best, but it's all right, and it's nice to have the extra engagement of having a manual in a V12 like this. Probably one of the last of its kind. One of the downsides of the ability and control of the 997 is that, although it's not unpleasant, it is actually quite stiff. This is a much nicer riding car, and I think that for 95% of people, most of the time, you'd be happier being in this than being in a 997 in terms of comfort. There's also more room, the cabin's more airy. Now, if you're spending this much on a car, you want it to feel special. The 997 may be better built, but the materials and so on in the cabin of this car and the general design are something else. Wow. Yeah, so I mean the carbon, the supple soft leather, the design of it, you know, in the 997, yeah, it's a nicely built car, but you don't, that, you know, the cabin certainly doesn't make you feel special. This definitely does. The one thing which is a bit of a letdown is a couple of small bits of Ford switchgear here and here, a couple of other bits here on which do feel cheap. They're not that nice to the touch. But having said that, you know, it's not a deal breaker. This is still a car that you would happily go down to your skiing trip in Zermatt, whereas maybe the 997 is more like a trip in the summer to Marbella. One of the criticisms that you might level at the DBS is that the steering's like a little bit odd at speed. It doesn't give as much feel as I was hoping. The 997 is definitely better on that side. And it's like a little bit light and wayward. It doesn't actually end up going anywhere, but it doesn't feel quite as stable as I would expect from basically what is a GT car like this one. Just check out the way this car looks. It's effortlessly cool. It's like David Tennant as opposed to Tom Cruise. The truth is that this car isn't as accomplished as a 997, but that doesn't actually make it worse. If you had to pick one car, and you could only own one car, and you had 80k to spend, so you had to use that every day, it had to be your only car, then okay, fine, I admit it, you'd get the 997. But who has 80k to spend on a car doesn't have another 2 or 3 cars? And if that's the case, if you've got some other cars and you want something that makes you feel special, that you want to use, then this is what I would pick. The problem with the 997 is that it tries to be so many things that the only thing it's actually exceptional at is being brutally, amazingly fast. But in terms of being rewarding, a standard 997 narrow body is probably more rewarding to drive hard. In terms of being a GT car, it can do that. It can be a tourer, but it's not brilliant at it. This is better at that. It's a less schizophrenic car in those terms. It knows what it is a little bit more than the 997, than a standard 997 turbo does anyway. But look, let's just pull over and have a look at a couple of the alternatives and what you can get for this sort of money and how they compare. So first of all, this is one car that I should have mentioned last time when we were looking at alternatives for 997, and that was definitely an oversight. The Mercedes AMG GT. For 85 grand, you can get a car which is basically brand new, 3,000 miles. Like the way that one looks, they are really good cars. You can only get the flappy paddle automatic. I don't think they do manuals in that particular car. Power wise, it's very much comparable, 515 horsepower. It is however turbocharged, but Mercedes with AMG have really managed to retain, unlike with the 997 turbo, they've really managed to retain at least some of the sound and character of the V8 that they're famous for. The next one, a little bit of an oddball maybe, a bit old, a bit different, but you could get yourself essentially practically a brand new BMW i8. It's not really in the same class as these cars, but nonetheless it is a really interesting car. In the right colour combination it can look quite nice, in the wrong colours it can look a little bit appalling. It's a 1.5 litre essentially hybrid with help from the electric motors. It's got synthetic sounds which don't really help its case greatly, but it's hugely cheap to run. Maybe you don't care if you have this kind of money, but I like the fact that some cars are just efficient even though they're fast. It's pretty fast. Again, I don't think it would be better in any particular area than this car or any other car that we've talked about, but I still like it and I still think it's an interesting car. Next, a Jaguar F-Type SVR. Again, for this one is up at 89, but you can easily get them for 80 and so on. I'm using this just because it's at least a different colour and has some nice pictures to show through. These aren't particularly as good as some other cars you could get for the money either, but they are as much, if not more, fun. Horsepower wise, 567 horsepower. These are real light brutes. They were a real departure from Jaguar at the time, from going for things that were just pretty much cruisers. They started focusing on cars that gave back a bit more emotion. And then lastly, what about a Ferrari California? Not one of the best Ferraris by any means. Didn't get fantastic reviews at the time, but it is still a Ferrari. They can look reasonably nice. This one here it has 460 horsepower, 43,000 miles, and forget the auction thing again. I've picked this because it's got nice pictures that we can have a look through. But here's another one, about 80k, so I presume this will go for that or less. I think they look quite nice. As I said, they're not the best cars, but it'd be quite comfortable. It's a Ferrari, it's different. So it's something I think that we could consider. All in all, I still don't think, I don't know, the Mercedes is quite tempting, but none of these cars are really as exclusive as this is. The other downside to most of those cars is that they won't retain their value in the way that this now will. I can't see these dropping much lower than they have already, especially a manual car like this, a V12. It's going to be the last of its kind, the last of the breed. So if it's not the only car that you were going to buy, and I can't see how anyone with 80k would only have one car, then I would definitely have this over a 997 Turbo. I'm sorry, Porsche fans, I know you're going to hate me. I do love Porsches, they are great, but that's the way it is. And the bombshell that I mentioned before is that the owner of the 997 that I tested last week actually traded that car in for this very DBS. So he only held on to the 997 Turbo for about 2 months or less. And then he decided that he wanted something else. I can't take the credit for that. He was already thinking about getting a DBS, so it's not down to me that he swapped over, but he has swapped over. So certainly in his eyes, that's a car that he found more desirable. This is a car that he found more desirable and that he wanted over the 997. Thank you as always for watching. Really appreciate it. Please do subscribe. Let me know what you think, particularly about these alternatives. You know, certainly the i8 and the Merc, they appeal to me for some reason. They really do. The Merc's a bit too common. The i8 is quite special, the i8, but not the best, maybe in any particular area. But thank you again. See you soon.